every conversation that you've been avoiding is also an opportunity that you've been avoiding, whether that's more honesty, more closeness, or simply more peace of mind for yourself. Well, hello, my friend, and welcome back to the Redefining Midlife podcast. I'm your host, Jo Clark, and thank you so very much for joining me here today for this important conversation that could actually make a real difference to your life and to your relationships. And can you believe that we are just a few episodes off our 200th show? It really has been such a journey getting here with all of you. And today's topic, well, it feels like exactly the kind of conversation that this podcast was built for. Because today we're talking about hard conversations. You know, the ones that we put off, or the ones that we might rehearse over and over at 3 a.m. in our minds and then never actually have. They're the ones that sit in the back of our minds for weeks, sometimes years, quietly taking up space that we didn't even realize that we were giving them. And maybe it's something that you've wanted to say to your partner for months. Maybe it's a conversation on a boundary that you know you need to set with one of your kids. Or perhaps a conversation with a friend that's been hanging in the air ever since something went unsaid between the two of you. Or maybe it's a conversation that you need to have at your workplace. So if you've ever bitten your tongue with a friend because you didn't want to rock the boat, or you swallowed your frustration with your partner because it felt easier than the fight that you might have had, or if you've ever stayed quiet with your grown kids because you didn't want to be the difficult one, well then this episode is definitely for you. So let's get into it. Now, here's something most of us learned early and learned well, and that is keeping the peace feels so much safer than speaking up. And as young girls, we certainly watched and learned these lessons. And as women, well, we got good at reading the room, for smoothing things over, and then making sure that everyone else was comfortable, even when we weren't. Somewhere along the way, a lot of us became the person who absorbs the tension so nobody else has to feel it. And for a long time, that might have worked for you, or at least it seemed to. It kept things running smoothly on the surface, even when underneath it all, something there was quietly building. But here's the thing about avoidance. It doesn't actually make the problem go away. It just makes it quieter. Because, the issue doesn't disappear. It just gets buried underground, and it tends to come back heavier than before. And sometimes that can be showing up as resentment or as distance or a slow drift that you can't quite explain in a relationship that perhaps once felt easy. And I'm sure you know the feeling of being annoyed at someone for something you never actually told them about. I'm very guilty of that. That's not usually one moment. That's more likely due to months or years of unspoken things that have been quietly stacking up. And research tells us that avoided conflict rarely resolves itself. It just changes shape. So what could have been a 10-minute conversation might become months of tension. Or what could have been cleared up with one honest sentence becomes a wall that's there now between two people who used to talk about everything. And the longer something stays unsaid, then the bigger it tends to grow in our minds until it feels almost too big to bring up at all. And that's exactly the trap. Because a conversation rarely gets easier the longer we wait. What happens is it gets heavier. And in midlife, we start to feel the weight of that more than ever. We've spent decades managing everyone else's comfort. Might be our kids, it could be our partners, our co-workers, even our friends. And then think about how many times we've smiled through things that really hurt us. When we said we were fine when we weren't. We told ourselves it was easier this way, don't rock that boat again. And then somewhere along the way, we forgot to manage our own comfort in the process. Now, this is a stage of life where a lot of us start to notice the cost of all of that smoothing over. And honestly, at this stage of life, we get tired of paying for it. We want relationships that feel honest and not just easy. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about we've got to pick more fights. And it's not about becoming someone who's suddenly combative or difficult, or someone who says every thought out loud the second it crosses her mind. It's the opposite, actually. I'll explain it. It's more about finally trusting yourself enough to say the true thing instead of the easy thing, even if your voice is going to shake a little bit while you're saying it. And that starts with self-awareness. Because before you can have an honest conversation with someone else, you actually need to get honest with yourself first. So ask yourself, well, what do I actually feel here? Not what you think you should feel, or not what would be convenient to feel, but what's actually true for you. And that can take a bit of quiet reflection. Maybe you need a walk, or maybe just a few minutes with a journal, or just sit with your own thoughts before you rush into anything. It's worth doing before you open up your mouth, because honestly, conversations usually tend to go sideways when we haven't even worked out what we're trying to say yet. Then there's emotional intelligence, which really just means being able to read the moment and the other person without losing your own voice in the process. And that's not always easy to do. But it's things like noticing when someone's starting to get defensive and maybe softening your delivery without abandoning your point. And it's like sensing when the timing is wrong and then choosing to wait without using that as an excuse to never bring it up at all. You can be aware of someone else's feelings and you can still hold on to your own truth. Those two things aren't in competition, even though it can feel that way when you're standing in the middle of a hard conversation and everything in you wants to either shut down or push harder. And before you dive into any difficult talk, it helps to get clear on what you're actually hoping to achieve. Is your goal simply looking to be heard? Or are you hoping something changes? Or do you just need to say your piece and let it land where it lands without needing a particular outcome from the other person at all? Now, all three are valid, but knowing which one you're going for changes how you will show up, what you say, and how you're going to feel afterwards, even if that conversation doesn't go the way that you pictured it to. So ask yourself, what's the outcome you're hoping for? And then just as importantly, what are you willing to let go of? Maybe you go in wanting an apology, but instead you walk out with an understanding instead. Or maybe you go in hoping to change someone's mind and you walk out simply having have had an honest conversation, which turns out to be enough. That's not a failure. That's actually how real conversations often go. Very few hard conversations end exactly the way we imagined them or the script that we created in our heads, and that's okay. And when you're figuring out what to say and how to say it, trust your intuition over your instinct. More often than not, your instinct will be that fast reactive pull, that urge to snap back or to shut down the second things get uncomfortable. But intuition is something much quieter and much steadier. It's that deeper knowing that actually tells you what feels true and right before you walk into a room. So give yourself a minute to check in with that before you start, even if it's just taking a deep breath or two before you knock on the door or pick up the phone. And timing matters too, and more than we give it credit for. Because if we're bringing up something important in the middle of a rushed morning or right as somebody walks in and they're feeling exhausted from work, it's rarely going to go well, no matter how well prepared you are with what you want to say. So it's about worth choosing a moment when you both have a bit of space, even if it might mean waiting a day or two longer than you'd like. And that's not the same as avoidance. There's a real difference between waiting for the right moment and waiting forever because the moment never feels right. Okay, so let's talk about where these conversations actually turn up. Because it's not just one corner of our lives, it's pretty much everywhere. With our grown kids, it often looks like boundary setting. Maybe it's telling your adult child that you can't be their emergency babysitter every weekend. Or perhaps that you need a phone call to go both ways instead of only when they need something from you. Learning to say what you need, even when it feels strange and unfamiliar, and even when you want to still be parts there available, like the way that you were when they were younger, is one of the hardest shifts of this stage of life. You're learning new roles. So it's okay to need something back from them. And it's okay to say, I love you, and also I need this to change. That sentence can hold both truths at once, and your kids, even the adult ones, well, they're more than capable of hearing it than we sometimes give them credit for. And with partners, it's naming what's not working before it turns into years of silent frustration. Maybe it's a way household responsibilities have quietly settled onto your shoulders, or the way you've stopped feeling truly seen in the relationship. Or it could be a resentment that's been building so slowly you almost didn't notice it happening. And as we've heard in our past episodes earlier this year with relationship experts, so many of our relationships don't end because of one big blow up. They slowly erode because neither person said the small, honest thing at the right time, over and over, until the distance became the new normal. And with friends and with co-workers, it's about speaking up without over-explaining or apologising for having a need at all. Maybe it's telling a friend that something she said really hurt you. Or it could be about letting a co-worker know that a comment landed wrong. Or simply just saying no to something without just having a big paragraph of justification behind it all. You know, you're allowed to say something didn't sit right with you. You don't need 3 paragraphs of justification first. And you certainly don't owe anyone an apology just for having a feeling. When you're in the conversation itself, just lead with your own experience rather than pointing fingers. There's a real difference between saying, you always do this to me, and saying, I've been overlooked lately and I just wanted to talk about it. The first one puts the other person on the defensive straight away before you've even finished the sentence, because it sounds like an accusation. And most people, including me and you, I would dare say, respond to accusations by defending themselves rather than listening. The second one opens that door instead of closing it, because it's about your experience. It's not about their character. It's also completely natural to feel nervous or frustrated or even just a little bit angry going into these conversations. And that's okay. Emotions can inform you how to communicate without controlling that whole exchange. You don't have to be perfectly calm to have a good conversation. You just need your emotions to be in the room with you, if you know what I mean. They're not the ones driving the car. So there's a difference between speaking from a place of hurt and speaking from a place of blame. And most of us can feel that difference even when we mightn't be able to name it. So I want to share a moment from my own life here where when I was working as a teacher. Now, there was a conversation that I'd put off having with a colleague of mine for months. I kept telling myself it wasn't the right time, that I'd bring it up later with her, that maybe it would just sort itself out on its own if I waited long enough. But it didn't. If anything, the longer that I waited, the more frustrated I became, and it grew in my head until I built the whole thing into something far bigger and scarier than it probably needed to be. But when I finally sat down and said the honest thing, and yes, I was nervous, I found that by the end of the conversation, something really had shifted. And it's not because the conversation was perfect. It was far from that. There were pauses on my behalf and there was a lot of awkwardness and a moment where I found myself looking for words because I couldn't quite put what I wanted to say into words that I thought wasn't going to offend her. But things did shift because I'd finally stopped carrying it all alone. So if you've got a moment like that of your own, I'd really love for you to sit with it as you listen to this episode today, because I promise you, you're not the only one who's been there. Sometimes the other person won't respond the way you hoped. You know, that's just life. They might get defensive. They might shut down completely. They might go quiet, or they might even walk away from the conversation before it's finished. That doesn't mean you did something wrong. And it doesn't mean the conversation failed. People respond to hard truths in all kinds of ways. And most of those reactions have far more to do with their own history than with how well you handled it. Having empathy for someone doesn't mean you have to let go of what you need. Those two things can exist at the same time. You can understand why someone reacted the way they did because, well, maybe they were caught off guard. Maybe it did touch something tender inside them. And you can still stay firm in what you needed to say. Empathy isn't the same as backing down. And it also helps to remember that you can't control how someone else receives what you say, only how you say it. You can choose your words carefully, you can pick a calm moment, and you can speak with as much kindness as you can manage, and the other person might still react badly. But that's not a reflection of how well you handled things. Some people just need time to sit with what you've said before they can respond to it with any grace. And that's okay too. Give the conversation some room to breathe rather than expecting a resolution the second the words leave your mouth. Sometimes the most honest and the most necessary conversations, they don't wrap up neatly in one sitting. And that's simply part of the process, not a sign you did something wrong. And if the conversation feels uncomfortable while it's happening, that discomfort isn't proof that you've got it wrong at all. Because growth rarely feels smooth in the moment. I'm sure you know that. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that feel the hardest to have. And the discomfort you feel walking into them is just often a sign of how much that they matter, not a sign that you should have stayed quiet. Okay, so here's the thing I want you to walk away with today. Hard conversations aren't a threat to your relationships. They can be a doorway into some deeper ones. And every conversation that you've been avoiding is also an opportunity that you've been avoiding, whether that's more honesty, more closeness, or simply more peace of mind for yourself. And I want to widen this out because it's just so much more than just motherhood. It's also your career, the conversation you've been avoiding with your boss or a colleague about what you might need, whether that's recognition, whether that's better conditions or fair pay, or simply just being heard in a room where you've stayed quiet for far too long. There are lots of these different types of examples in our life. It could be about the next stage of your relationship with your partner, or the honest talk that could bring you closer together instead of further apart. The kind of conversation that reminds you both why you chose each other in the first place. It's also about something else important in your life, your friendships, the ones that could go even deeper if you were just willing to say the real thing instead of the easy thing, instead of staying on the surface because it feels safer than risking that closeness that you might have. Midlife touches every part of who you are. And learning to have these conversations, and I mean really learning it, well, that could be just one of the most powerful shifts that you make in this stage of life. Not because every conversation is going to go perfectly, but because you'll start trusting yourself enough to have them at all. Now, I think about how many years I spent believing that keeping quiet was the same as keeping the peace. It wasn't. It just meant that I was the only one carrying the weight of things left unsaid. And I know I'm not alone in that. So many of us were taught, in big ways and in small, that being easy to get along with mattered more than being honest. And that good women, well, they don't rock the boat. They don't make a fuss. And they don't ask for much. But somewhere in midlife, I'm finding that a lot of us just start to question that. We start to wonder what our relationships might look like if we actually said the true thing more often. Not the angry thing, not the accusing thing, just the true thing, said with as much care as we can manage. And that shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens with one conversation at a time. The first one you have might feel clumsy, Your voice might shake. You might lose your train of thought halfway through. You might walk away wishing you said it differently, because hindsight is a wonderful thing, but that's fine and that's normal. Every hard conversation that you have makes the next one a little more possible and a little less frightening. You're not aiming for perfect, you're aiming for honest. So, if there's a conversation you've been putting off, I hope today gave you a little more courage to have it. Start small if you need to. You don't have to solve everything in one sitting, and you certainly don't have to say it perfectly the first time either. It's these small steps that you're going to take that will lead to the big changes in your life. And as I like to always ask, if not now, when? So thank you so much for taking the time to be with me here today, and I'll see you back here for our next episode next week. Cheers for now. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, follow, and share it with another incredible midlife woman. And join me next week as we keep creating an amazing second half of life.